Maid's daughter slept on the floor with Billionaire's shivering son. His response changed her life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a cold winter evening at the mansion of billionaire Gregory Westbrook. The wind howled outside, sending chills through the vast estate. Inside, the grand chandeliers sparkled in the foyer, and the fireplace roared with warmth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. But in one corner of the mansion, a much quieter scene was unfolding, one that no one expected. Clara, the young maid's daughter, was sitting on the cold marble floor next to young Henry Westbrook, the billionaire's son. He was shivering, his body wrapped in a thick woolen blanket, yet still trembling with cold. The mansion's temperature was perfectly regulated, but Henry had been ill for days, and tonight, it had taken a turn for the worse. Clara, despite her own discomfort, had stayed with him. She didn't belong in this luxurious space, but she couldn't leave the boy alone. Henry was only 10, a delicate child, and his condition had made him fragile. As his fever spiked, Clara, though exhausted from a long day's work, chose to stay by his side, holding him close to her. She had been taught to be invisible, to be nothing more than a shadow in the house of the rich. But tonight, she couldn't let him suffer alone. Clara sat on the floor, cross-legged, her back pressed against the wall. She had wrapped herself in her worn coat, the only warmth she could find. She hadn't meant to intrude on this world of opulence, where she was merely a servant, but in this moment, all that mattered was that Henry wasn't alone. She spoke softly to him, trying to comfort him as best as she could, despite the cold and the distance she had always felt from the family she worked for. Henry, who was usually so distant and cold to her, barely seemed to notice she was there. His eyes were glazed with fever, and his body shivered uncontrollably. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional cough from Henry. Clara's eyes kept drifting to the door, wondering if anyone would come to check on him. But no one did. The family rarely paid attention to him when he was unwell. She had seen how they ignored his cries for help before. His father, Gregory Westbrook, was too consumed by his empire to notice his son's struggles. And his mother, a woman of immense beauty and wealth, was more concerned with her social status than with the well-being of her own child. Clara was used to being invisible in the world of the Westbrooks. But tonight, she couldn't ignore Henry's suffering. She felt a deep pang of empathy for him, despite all the ways he and his family had treated her. She knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to be unseen. But Clara couldn't turn away. She placed her hand gently on Henry's forehead, brushing the damp strands of hair away from his face. Her heart ached as she watched him, so young, so vulnerable. What did he deserve in life, she wondered? To be cared for, to be loved? To be seen as a person, not just the heir to a fortune? In this moment, Clara's heart went out to him, and she made a silent vow to do everything she could to help him, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. As the night wore on, Clara stayed by Henry's side, whispering soothing words to him. She could feel her own exhaustion setting in, her body yearning for sleep, but she knew she couldn't leave. She had to make sure he was safe, even if it meant spending the entire night on the cold floor with him. Clara's mind wandered back to her own life. Her mother had worked tirelessly for years, barely scraping by to provide for her. They had always lived in a small, cramped apartment on the edge of town, far from the glittering mansions and grand estates like the one she now found herself in. Clara had learned to make do with little, to never ask for more than she needed. But tonight, as she sat beside Henry, she felt a stirring within her, a quiet belief that perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to life than this. As the hours passed, Clara's determination grew. She would protect Henry, no matter what. And little did she know, this simple act of kindness would change the course of her life forever. As the night wore on, Clara remained beside Henry, her body aching from the cold marble floor, but her heart was focused on the task at hand. She was determined not to leave his side until he was better. She had been a silent observer in this mansion for so long, but tonight was different. Tonight, She was doing what no one else seemed to care to do, showing compassion to a child who needed it. Henry's fever was still high, his small body trembling under the thick blanket, and Clara gently pressed her hand to his forehead, feeling the warmth of his skin. She knew this fever wasn't something that would pass on its own, and yet, there was no one coming to help. It was always like this. His father, Gregory Westbrook, was an influential businessman, the patriarch of an empire that stretched far and wide. But Gregory had never shown much interest in his son's well-being. The boy was more of an afterthought, a title to pass on the family wealth to. Clara often wondered if Gregory even remembered that Henry was his son, or if he just saw him as another cog in the machine of his grand empire. The night was still, the only sound being the occasional crackling of the fire in the hearth. Clara's exhaustion was becoming overwhelming, but she refused to leave. She had seen Henry in his most vulnerable moments before, but it was different tonight. He was sick, and in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but think that no one in this grand mansion would notice if something were to happen to him. A chill ran down her spine as she thought of how easily he could disappear into the shadows, just like she had. But Clara wouldn't let that happen. Despite her fatigue, she pulled the blanket tighter around Henry, her small hands smoothing over his cold skin. As she sat in silence, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of responsibility for this child. She had always been taught to be invisible in this world, to stay out of the way of the rich and powerful, but she wasn't invisible anymore. She was here for a reason. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She held her breath, wondering if someone had finally come to check on Henry. The door to the room creaked open, and Clara's heart skipped a beat as she saw a tall figure standing in the doorway. It was Gregory Westbrook, the billionaire father. He looked down at Clara and Henry with a mix of confusion and irritation. His expression was cold, his sharp eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of his son in a vulnerable state. For a moment, there was a tense silence. Clara stayed perfectly still, unsure of what to expect. But then, to her surprise, Gregory didn't say a word about the scene before him. Instead, he stepped into the room, his gaze lingering on Henry. His face softened ever so slightly, and for the briefest of moments, Clara thought she saw a flicker of something resembling concern in his eyes. He walked over to Henry's bedside, his hands reaching down to touch his son's forehead. Clara couldn't believe what she was seeing. For the first time, Gregory was showing his son the kind of affection Clara had never seen before. Gregory gently adjusted the blanket around Henry and looked back at Clara. "He's been running a high fever for too long," he said, his voice low. "Why didn't anyone say something?" Clara bit her lip, hesitating before speaking. I didn't know who else to tell," she said quietly. Gregory paused for a moment, his sharp eyes scanning her face. Clara could feel the weight of his gaze, but she didn't look away. She knew that if she spoke the truth, if she told him how neglected Henry had been all this time, it would change everything. "I'll get him some medicine," Gregory said, his voice still distant, but there was an edge of determination in his tone. As he turned to leave, he glanced back at Clara. "Thank you for staying with him." Clara was stunned. She wasn't used to being thanked by the wealthy family she worked for. Her heart skipped a beat as she nodded silently, not knowing how to respond. As Gregory walked out of the room, Clara stayed seated beside Henry. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. This moment, this small act of care from Henry's father, felt like a turning point. It was as if the world had tilted ever so slightly, and for the first time, Clara felt like she might be seen. But she knew the road ahead would still be difficult. The mansion was filled with secrets, and Henry's illness was just one of many things hidden in the shadows. Clara didn't know what the future would hold, but she was determined to be there for Henry, no matter what. The night may have started in darkness, but as she sat by his side, Clara knew that she had made a difference. The smallest voice had been heard, and it had started to change everything. The following day, the atmosphere in the mansion was strangely quiet. The usual hum of servants, the clinking of silverware, and the murmur of conversations seemed absent. Instead, there was a lingering heaviness in the air, as if something had shifted. Clara had spent the night sitting beside Henry, not daring to move, her body aching but her mind racing. Gregory had finally acknowledged Henry's condition, and for the first time, Clara allowed herself to believe that perhaps there was hope. Gregory's visit had surprised her, but it wasn't the only change. For the first time, Henry seemed calmer. His fever had broken, and he was still weak, but there was a spark of life in his eyes that hadn't been there the day before. Clara's heart swelled with relief, though she remained cautious. She knew that just because Gregory had taken an interest once didn't mean it would last. As she sat by Henry's bedside, she heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and this time it was not Gregory. It was Delilah Monroe, Gregory's fiancée. Clara's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively stood up, feeling herself shrink into the background, just as she had been taught. Delilah had always been an imposing figure, beautiful, cold, and indifferent to the staff. She barely noticed Clara most days, if at all. But today, as she walked into the room, her gaze fell on Clara, and there was something different about it. Delilah's expression was unreadable, her usual air of superiority replaced by something closer to uncertainty. Clara quickly moved to the side, not wanting to be noticed, but Delilah stopped her. "You were here last night?" she asked, her tone soft, but with a sharp edge. Clara nodded, unsure of how to respond. Delilah's gaze flickered to Henry, who was now resting more comfortably, and then back to Clara. "I don't know why you stayed," Delilah continued, her voice steady. "But I suppose it's a good thing you did." Clara's heart raced. She had never heard Delilah speak like this before. The woman who had always dismissed her, the one who viewed her as nothing more than a shadow in the house, was now acknowledging her presence. It felt surreal. Delilah's gaze softened as she looked down at Henry. "He's a difficult child," she said, almost to herself. "His father is too busy and I don't know how to reach him." Clara didn't know how to respond to that. She had always known that Henry's relationship with his parents was strained, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel even more real. Delilah's eyes lingered on Clara for a moment longer before she spoke again. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now. "You've done more for him than anyone else here. I don't know if Gregory sees it yet, but I do." Clara felt a wave of emotion wash over her, and she struggled to keep her composure. She had spent so many years being overlooked, treated as invisible, but now Delilah was acknowledging her in a way that no one else ever had. It felt like a shift, a small but powerful change. As Delilah turned to leave the room, she paused at the door. "I think you should stay with him for a little while longer," she said, her voice softer than usual. "He's not as strong as you think he is." Clara didn't know what to say. She just nodded, still stunned by the unexpected kindness in Delilah's words. As the door closed behind her, Clara returned to Henry's side. She gently brushed his hair away from his face, her fingers trembling slightly. She had never expected this. Never expected a moment where someone might see her for who she was, rather than just a maid's daughter. But now, in this quiet room, with the weight of the mansion's opulence pressing down on her, Clara felt like she had made a difference. And it wasn't just Henry's life that was changing. It was hers too. She had always known that her life in the mansion would never be the same as the family's. But perhaps, just perhaps, she had started something that might allow her to be more than just the invisible servant. Clara didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time, she felt like she had a place in it. The next few days passed in a blur for Clara. Henry's fever had finally broken, and though he was still weak, there was something different about him. He wasn't the same distant child he had been before, the one who barely acknowledged her presence. Now, he looked at her with a hint of gratitude in his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that spoke volumes. Clara had never expected this, never imagined that her simple act of kindness would change things. But it had. As she continued to care for him, she noticed subtle changes. Gregory, though still distant, had been more attentive to Henry. He no longer dismissed his son's needs as he had before. It wasn't much, but it was something. Meanwhile, Delilah had become strangely quiet, and Clara wondered if the events of the past week had caused her to reconsider her own place in this house. One afternoon, as Clara was sitting by Henry's bed, reading quietly to him, Gregory entered the room. Clara stood up instinctively, but Gregory stopped her with a raised hand. "You don't need to stand," he said, his tone softer than she had ever heard it. "I came to check on him." Clara nodded, feeling awkward. She wasn't used to being treated this way, especially not by Gregory. He walked over to Henry's bed and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice gentle. Henry, still groggy from the medication, nodded. "Better," he mumbled. "Thanks, Dad." Clara noticed the small smile that tugged at Gregory's lips, though it was quickly replaced by a look of concern. He glanced at Clara. "You've been taking good care of him," he said. "I don't know how to thank you for that." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected such a statement from him. Gregory Westbrook, the powerful billionaire, the man who had spent most of his life building an empire, was thanking her, a simple maid's daughter. She didn't know what to say. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she replied softly. "No," Gregory said, shaking his head. "You're doing more than that." He paused for a moment before continuing, his voice becoming more serious. "You've shown my son kindness, something I didn't even realize he needed." Clara didn't know how to respond. She had always seen herself as nothing more than a servant in this house, doing the work that was expected of her. But now, standing before Gregory, she realized that perhaps she wasn't as invisible as she had always thought. Gregory looked at her, his gaze softer than it had ever been. "You've earned my respect, Clara," he said, "and I will make sure you're properly compensated for your work." Clara blinked, surprised by his words. She had never expected anything more than the bare minimum from him, but now he was promising something different. Gregory turned to leave, but then paused at the door. "I'll speak with the staff about your position," he said, before walking out. Clara was left standing there, her mind racing. She had never imagined that a simple act of compassion would lead to such a change. She had always thought that she would be stuck in this world of servitude, never able to escape the shadows of the Westbrook mansion. But now, for the first time, it seemed like there was a chance for something more. The next few days passed with a mix of uncertainty and hope. Clara's role in the household had shifted. She was no longer just a maid to Henry, but someone who had earned his trust and respect. Gregory had kept his word, and Clara found herself being treated differently by the other staff members. They no longer ignored her or looked down on her. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was there. As for Henry, his health continued to improve, and Clara found herself spending more time with him. They began to talk more, and Henry started to open up to her. He confided in her about his struggles with his father, how he felt like he was always trying to live up to expectations he could never meet. Clara listened quietly, offering her support. She understood what it was like to feel overlooked and unheard. Henry wasn't just a privileged child. He was someone who needed someone to believe in him. And for the first time, he had someone who did. As the days turned into weeks, Clara's place in the Westbrook household began to change. It wasn't just the way she was treated by others, it was how she felt about herself. She had always believed that she was destined to stay in the background, invisible and unimportant. But now, she saw that her kindness had made a difference. It had not only changed Henry's life, but it had changed hers as well. Clara wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore. She was someone who had earned the respect of the people around her, and that was something she had never imagined would happen. She knew that her life would never be the same, but for the first time, she was excited about the possibilities. Weeks passed, and the change in the mansion was palpable. Clara's place in the household had shifted in ways she couldn't have imagined. Henry's health continued to improve, and their bond grew stronger with each passing day. He was no longer the distant child, and she was no longer just the maid's daughter. There was a new understanding between them, one that neither of them had expected. Gregory, too, had kept his word. He treated Clara with more respect, acknowledging her role in his son's recovery. Though the relationship remained formal, there was a certain shift in the atmosphere. Gregory had even taken the time to speak to Clara directly, not as an employee, but as someone who had contributed to the well-being of his family. One afternoon, as Clara was finishing her duties, Gregory called her into his study. Clara entered cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Gregory looked up from his desk, his eyes softening as he saw her. "Clara, please have a seat," he said, motioning to the chair in front of his desk. Clara sat down, her heart racing. She wasn't used to being invited into Gregory's private space, and the formality of the moment made her uneasy. Gregory folded his hands together, leaning slightly forward. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," he began. Clara nodded, her mind spinning. What could this be about? Had she done something wrong? Gregory seemed to sense her apprehension and offered a reassuring smile. "I've been thinking about how things have changed around here," he continued. "You've been an incredible help to Henry, and I've noticed your dedication. I want to make sure you're properly taken care of, for everything you've done." Clara blinked, taken aback by his words. She had never expected anything more than the bare minimum from Gregory. But now, he was speaking to her like an equal. He paused, his gaze steady. "I want to offer you a position in the company," he said. Clara's heart skipped a beat. "A position?" she repeated, stunned. Gregory nodded. "Yes. You've shown a remarkable ability to connect with Henry, to care for him when no one else would. And I've come to realize that your skills go far beyond what I had originally thought." Clara struggled to find her voice. "But, I'm just the maid's daughter," she said softly, unsure how to respond. Gregory smiled, his expression both kind and firm. "You're more than that, Clara. I see potential in you. I want you to have the opportunity to grow, to be more than just the person who cleans this house." Clara felt a rush of emotions, shock, disbelief, and a growing sense of hope. She had never considered a future beyond this mansion, beyond the walls that had always defined her. But here was Gregory, a man who had once seen her as invisible, now offering her a chance at something more. "I don't know what to say," Clara said, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything right now," Gregory replied. "Take some time to think about it. But know that the offer is there." Clara nodded, still processing his words. As she left his study, her mind was racing. A position in the company? It seemed like a dream, one that she never thought would be within her reach. She had always believed that she would remain in the background, serving the wealthy family that had employed her. But now, for the first time, Clara saw a future beyond those walls. She had always known that she was capable of more, that she had something to offer, but she had never been given the chance to prove it. Now, with Gregory's offer, everything was different. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she was ready to find out. As she walked back to her quarters, she couldn't help but smile. The mansion, once a symbol of her invisibility, now felt like a place where change was possible. Clara had always dreamed of a different life, one where she wasn't just the maid's daughter, but something more. And now, for the first time, that dream felt within reach. The days that followed were filled with both anticipation and uncertainty. Clara had never expected that Gregory's offer would feel like such a heavy decision. A position in his company? It was almost too much to believe, too much to comprehend. She had spent her entire life working in the background, invisible, unnoticed. But now, she was being given an opportunity that most people could only dream of. As she sat in her small room, her thoughts raced. She wasn't sure what this offer meant, or how it would change her life, but she knew that it would. For the first time, Clara was being recognized for who she truly was. Someone capable, someone who had the potential to be more than just a maid's daughter. She thought of her mother, who had worked tirelessly to provide for her, and the sacrifices she had made. Would this offer make everything worth it? Would it give her the chance to repay her mother for all the hard work she had done for so many years? Clara knew that accepting Gregory's offer would change everything. It meant stepping out of the shadows and into a world that had always seemed out of reach. But it also meant taking on a new responsibility, one that she wasn't sure she was ready for. The mansion had always been her world, the place she knew how to navigate, even if it was a place where she had never felt completely welcome. But now, she had a chance to build a new future for herself. The next day, Clara met with Gregory again in his office. As she entered the room, she could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her. Gregory sat at his desk, looking as composed as ever, but there was something different in his expression. He was waiting for her answer. "I've thought about it," Clara began, her voice steady but unsure. "And I would like to accept your offer." Gregory smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "I think you'll do great things here." Clara felt a rush of emotions, a mixture of excitement, fear, and hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that this was the start of something new. As she left Gregory's office, her heart lifted. She had made the choice that would shape her future, but she also knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles to overcome, and doubts to face. But Clara was no longer the same person who had walked into that mansion all those months ago. She was no longer just the maid's daughter, invisible to those around her. She had earned her place, and she was ready to prove herself. Days turned into weeks as Clara adjusted to her new role in the company. She was given tasks that challenged her in ways she had never imagined. At first, it was overwhelming. She wasn't used to the corporate world, the language of business and strategy. But Clara was determined. She threw herself into her work, asking questions, learning, and growing. Henry, too, had become a part of her world in a way that felt natural. He was no longer the distant, aloof child she had once cared for. They shared conversations, moments of laughter, and sometimes silence. She found that they had more in common than she had ever realized. Both of them were trying to find their place in a world that expected more from them than they could give. As Clara settled into her new life, she realized that her relationship with Gregory had changed as well. He no longer treated her like a mere employee, but as someone who had earned his respect. They spoke more openly now, and while the formalities still lingered, there was a sense of mutual understanding between them. One evening, after a long day of work, Clara found herself alone in the garden, taking a moment to herself. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the flowers and trees. As she stood there, she thought about how far she had come. It hadn't been easy, but she had made it. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she had control over her own destiny. She had stepped out of the shadows and into the light, and the possibilities seemed endless. Clara didn't know what the future would hold, but she was ready to face it, whatever it was. She had found her voice, and she wasn't going to let it go. As Clara continued to adjust to her new role in the Westbrook household, she found herself facing new challenges each day. Her position within the company had opened doors she never thought possible, but with those doors came expectations, pressure, and the realization that her life would never be quite the same. It was a life she had chosen, a life she had worked for, but it was still one filled with uncertainty. Despite the progress she had made, there were moments when Clara felt like an outsider in this world of power and wealth. Her co-workers at the company treated her with respect, but she could still sense the differences that separated her from them. It wasn't just about the wealth, it was the way they spoke, the way they carried themselves, the way they had been raised. Clara had grown up in a completely different world, one where survival meant hard work, perseverance, and sometimes just getting by. One day, as she sat in the company's sleek glass office building, going over some reports, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the window. The woman she saw staring back at her was not the same person who had walked into the Westbrook mansion months ago. She looked different, more confident, more comfortable in her own skin. Yet, in the back of her mind, there was still a small voice that reminded her of her roots, of the person she used to be. That voice never fully went away, no matter how much she tried to silence it. Later that evening, after a long day of work, Clara sat in her small apartment, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her. The apartment was humble, a far cry from the luxurious mansion she now spent her days in. But it was hers, a space where she could finally breathe, a place where she didn't have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. She had a quiet dinner, the sound of the television playing softly in the background. As she ate, her mind wandered to Henry, to the boy she had once cared for in the shadows of the mansion. He had grown so much in the past few weeks, and Clara had become a steady presence in his life. It wasn't just her role in the house that had changed, but their relationship as well. Henry was no longer the distant, aloof child he had been. They had become friends, of sorts, finding comfort in each other's company. Clara had always felt like an outsider in that mansion, but with Henry, she found someone who understood what it was like to feel lost, to feel invisible. He had his own struggles with his father, who had always been more focused on business than family. Clara understood that, because in many ways, she had grown up with the same sense of neglect, the same feeling of being overlooked. Yet, with each passing day, they had become a support system for each other. As Clara cleaned up her dishes and settled onto the couch, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, surprised to see a message from Gregory. "Clara," the message began. "I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come to the mansion tomorrow?" Clara felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. What could he possibly want to talk to her about? Was it related to the company, or was it something personal? She couldn't be sure, but she knew she had to go. The next day, Clara arrived at the mansion, the familiar feeling of stepping into a world of wealth and power settling over her. Gregory was waiting for her in the study, his expression serious. "Clara, please sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She sat down, her heart racing. Gregory looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about you and your future here. You've made incredible progress in such a short time, and I believe you're capable of more than you realize." Clara listened closely, unsure where this conversation was going. Gregory paused, then continued. I'm offering you a promotion. A position that will give you more responsibility, more influence within the company. You've earned it, and I believe you have the potential to do great things here. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. A promotion? More responsibility? She had worked so hard to get to where she was, but this felt like a whole new level. It was a huge opportunity, one that could change everything for her. She felt a wave of emotions, excitement, fear, and a deep sense of uncertainty. I don't know what to say, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Gregory smiled, his expression warm but firm. You don't have to say anything right now. Take your time to think about it, but I want you to know that I believe in you. Clara nodded, her mind spinning. She had come so far, and now, she was being offered the chance to take her life to the next level. It was everything she had ever wanted, but it was also terrifying. She had worked so hard to prove herself, to earn a place in a world that had once felt so out of reach. And now, that world was hers for the taking. But at what cost? The decision was hers, and Clara knew she had to make it carefully. She had fought for so long to be seen, to be heard, but now she had to decide who she wanted to be in this new world. Would she rise to the challenge, or would she remain in the shadows, afraid of what might come next? Clara spent the next few days in a state of constant thought, the weight of Gregory's offer pressing heavily on her. She had never imagined being in this position, a position where she could choose to take control of her future. The world of the Westbrooks, the polished mansion, the corporate offices, it all seemed so far from the life she had known, a life where survival had meant staying invisible. Now, with Gregory's offer, she was being asked to step into the light, to be seen and heard in ways she had never allowed herself to be before. But as the excitement surged within her, so did the doubts. Could she really take this step? Was she ready for the responsibility, for the pressure that would come with it? Clara knew that if she accepted, everything would change, her role, her identity, even her relationships with those around her. There were still moments when she felt like an outsider in this new world. It wasn't just the wealth, the luxury of the mansion, or the boardrooms filled with suits and important decisions. It was the way they spoke, the way they moved, the confidence they carried with them. She had always felt like she was just the maid's daughter, a background character in a world full of main players. Now, she was being asked to step into that spotlight, and she wasn't sure if she could. But as she thought about it, Clara realized that this was her chance to prove that she was more than just the role she had been assigned. She had always been capable, always been strong, but she had never been given the opportunity to show that to anyone. This could be her moment, her chance to change her life. The day she went to the Westbrook mansion to give Gregory her answer, Clara felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. She walked through the grand hall, her footsteps echoing in the vast space, the familiar sense of intimidation creeping up on her. But this time, she felt different. This time, she wasn't just the maid's daughter. She was someone who had earned a place in this world. When she entered Gregory's study, he was already seated, waiting for her. He looked up, his expression calm but expectant. Clara stood there for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She had spent so long being afraid of this moment, of the pressure of making the right choice. But now, she knew what she had to do. I've made my decision, Clara said, her voice steady. Gregory looked at her, his expression unreadable. And, he asked, his voice quiet but curious. Clara took a deep breath, her nerves suddenly disappearing as a surge of confidence took over. I accept your offer, she said. I'm ready for the responsibility, for the challenge. Gregory's eyes softened slightly, and for the first time, Clara saw a flicker of genuine approval. He stood up and walked over to her. I'm glad to hear that, he said. You've made the right choice, Clara. I have no doubt that you'll do great things here. The words felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders. She had made the right decision, and she knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but it would be worth it. As she left Gregory's study, a feeling of empowerment washed over her. She had taken the first step into a new world, a world where she could no longer hide in the shadows. She wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore. She was someone with a future, someone who had earned her place in this world. The journey ahead would be challenging, but Clara was ready. She had proved to herself that she could do it, and that was all that mattered. Months had passed since Clara's decision to accept Gregory's offer, and her life had changed in ways she could hardly have imagined. The transition from being the maid's daughter to an important part of the Westbrook empire had been challenging, but rewarding. She had earned respect, not just from the staff, but from the business world that had once seemed so distant to her. Gregory had kept his promise. He treated her with dignity, and through his mentorship, Clara learned not just the technical skills of business, but the nuances of leadership, communication, and decision-making. She was no longer just a quiet observer in the background of the mansion. She had become an integral part of the company's operations, managing projects, making important decisions, and even contributing to strategic planning. Clara's transformation didn't stop there. She found herself standing alongside Henry, who was now growing into a confident, thoughtful young man. Their relationship had blossomed into one of true friendship, and Clara had become a steady influence in his life. Henry confided in her more than anyone else in his family, and the two often spoke about their hopes, dreams, and the future. Gregory, though still distant at times, had come to rely on Clara in ways he had never expected. Their professional relationship had grown into something more. He sought her advice on critical matters, and he appreciated her ability to think outside the box. For Clara, it was a surreal experience, but she had earned her place. And while she was still the same person at heart, she had grown in ways she never thought possible. One evening, as Clara walked through the garden of the Westbrook estate, she stopped to admire the sunset, a rare moment of peace amidst the chaos of her busy life. The warm colors of the sky stretched over the horizon, reminding her of the long journey she had taken. Her mind drifted back to the days when she had first arrived at the mansion, a scared, invisible girl unsure of her place in the world. Back then, she had never imagined a future like this, one where she was respected, valued, and seen for who she truly was. Now, as she stood there, her heart full of gratitude, she realized just how far she had come. The mansion, once a place of fear and uncertainty, now felt like a home she had helped build, brick by brick, a home where she had found not just a job, but a sense of purpose. Clara knew that her work was far from over. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready to face whatever came next, because she had proven to herself that she was capable of achieving great things. As she turned to head back inside, she spotted Gregory standing by the door, watching her. He gave her a small nod, a gesture of recognition that meant more to her than any words could. It was in that moment that Clara realized just how much had changed. She had started this journey as a girl with nothing but a dream, and now she was a woman who had built a future for herself, one that was filled with opportunities and possibilities. She had not only found success, but had found herself. With a quiet smile, Clara stepped inside, ready for whatever the future held, knowing that she had already overcome the greatest challenge, becoming the person she was always meant to be.